and you are ready for the weekend. Actually, I know some of you who are still working, whether you're working from home or you are an essential worker going into the office. This is it for you. You are off tomorrow because Saturday is a holiday. And I'll be interested to know what some of you will be doing this weekend, how you will be celebrating the holiday, particularly this holiday, in light of everything that's going on in the country. For those of you who will be catching this broadcast on the replay, shout out to you all. Hope that you enjoy all the information that you're going to receive tonight. Of course, I am in the midst of a series on wellness, and it has been a great week of information. If my viewers haven't learned anything, and I know that they have, some of them have talked to me outside of the broadcast just about some of the information that they've received. I know I have learned a great deal. This has definitely been food for me. And tonight, the learning continues as we move from the physical to the spiritual. So, as always, when you get on the broadcast, if you're going to be watching live tonight, make sure you go ahead and chime into those comments. Let me know where you are watching from tonight. We're going to be getting started in just a moment. I want to give everyone an opportunity to get in front of their computers, in front of their tablets, or pull those cell phones out and get comfortable for tonight's broadcast as our conversation on wellness continues. Again, when you get on, shout me out. Let me know exactly where you are watching from tonight. So, we're going to go ahead and get started with our Ray of Motivation moment. And my question or my challenge for you tonight is eat your own food. Eat your own food. I have been to a lot of gatherings where, people, they bring in their favorite dish that is requested by everyone, no matter where they go, whether that is a church function, whether that's a baby shower, a retirement party, a family function, family reunions. I know so many family reunions these days have events catered, but when the family unit is small, oftentimes, you ask Aunt Lulabelle to bring those peas that you love, and you have your grandma or your Mima or your Ma Dia to bring that fried chicken that she is so well loved for. However, I always find it interesting when someone brings something from their house and they don't want to eat their own food. That is always actually a red flag for me. And in these pandemic streets, of course, many of us are steering clear of anything where there is community food. But that's actually not the food that I'm talking about tonight. I'm actually talking about what you are sharing with others. And I'll be honest with you, basically, this all came about, this Ray of Motivation moment tonight came about because I basically had to eat my own food. Last night during the broadcast, as Nasha and I were talking, I was basically sharing an experience where I had a flat tire. I was ready to be distraught and all just upset for no reason, because as soon as I stopped to think about it, I was thinking there isn't an issue here. You have AAA, you have a spare tire, you're already off the highway. Just do what you do, calls AAA, get the tire changed and be done. And that's exactly what I did. And it ended up being one of the easiest tire changes I'd ever had in my life. Now, the thing that I know really helped that to be such a great experience was just a little kind of hiccup in the road was my mindset. And so today I got some news that I was not quite expecting to receive today. And I was about to go down that same road that I had gone down when I got that flat tire on the side of the road. And I had to think back like, Boo Boo, you just shared this story with Nasha and with all of your viewers last night about mindset. So what are you going to do? Are you going to worry, or are you going to change your mindset and you're going to eat what you've been feeding everybody else? So make sure no matter what you're putting out, what kind of food you're sharing with others, that when it's time, you eat from your own plate. And that is your Ray of Motivation moment for this Thursday edition of the Angela Ray Show. Well, As I said before, we have been talking about wellness throughout this week, and we are about to change gears tonight with my special guest. He was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. He enrolled in Jackson State University with the intention of studying business. However, when he started volunteering at a local church, he realized he really had a heart for helping people. And today he is the co founder and lead pastor of the Outlet Community Church in Atlanta, Georgia. So please help me welcome Vince Thomas Jr. How are you tonight?
Hey, Angela, thank you so much for having me on the show. I am doing actually outstanding. So we'll talk more about why that is the case here tonight, but doing well. And I absolutely loved your ray of sunshine. What the ray moment, ray of light? What
You know what? I'm not playing with you tonight. Ray of motivation moment.
listen, ray of motivation. It was a light. It was you lit up my life with that. So I thank you so much.
So I mentioned a little bit of this when I introduced you about your passion for helping people and discovering that, and then eventually now you are a lead pastor. But how did you get involved with ministry? That that was point A. We know you're at point B, but how was that road in the middle?
You know, I almost was born into it. I was born on a Sunday, February 8th, 87. 6 weeks later, my dad had me in a limousine heading to church on Easter Sunday. So I really had an example of family, grandparents, aunts. My mother was an outstanding example. When my father passed, she was an excellent single mother, always serving in her local church. So at the age of 12 is when I began actually speaking in other churches, and around 14, 15, I had almost like a decent schedule. And so as a teenager, you try to run from these little churchy things, but there was always this call that just kept pulling me back. And I remember making a deal with God when I was 18 that I'm going to go ahead and pursue professional baseball. And when I get done with that lucrative career, then I'll come back and do what he called me to do. But something about when you're called to do something, it doesn't matter if you're in, I was in Mississippi, you could be in the desert, you could be in outer space. You are going to do what you were made to do. So I would say unofficially 12, officially when I was 18 years old, I began serving in ministry and just found anywhere where I could serve. That's just been my heart is how can I help? Don't necessarily want the stage, don't necessarily want the spotlight, but just want to know how can I come alongside and be a help. And these last 15 or so years just have been really rewarding. A lot of lessons, but extremely rewarding.
And what was that like speaking as a 12-year-old? Because I'm not a minister, but I have spoken in church at a young age, and I'm just curious what your experience was like because I know what mine was like.
I had great again examples, great mentors. My children's minister, she used to pick me up when I was 9 years old at 4 a.m. in the morning, and she would take me to church with her to lay hands on the chairs when I was 9. And so from watching those examples and always being told that it's not us that's actually doing the work, but God on the inside of us, and always give him credit. It started as an early age of just surrendering to what does God want to do through me. And so you don't get a chance to get in your head and think about, oh, am I saying this right? Am I doing this right? You're like, listen, I didn't call me to do this, so I'm going to let him just do what he does through me. And so from an early age, just always had this acknowledgement or this awareness to, man, you know what? God's with me. And if he's telling me to say something, you better say it and you better do it. And just from there, the stages got larger.
It's been my observation, being a believer myself and being in the church all my life as well, that in times of tragedy, people tend to turn to the church. I will never forget attending church the Sunday after 9/11. The church where I was a member, it was so packed that at one point my pastor said he asked all of the men and the boys to stand up so the women could sit down. And I just remember I'd never seen anything like that, where it was so many people who were looking for answers, who were looking for help, and they came to church. We're now in the midst of a pandemic, and of course, many of us are not worshiping in person. What kinds of challenges with people looking for answers have you faced as a pastor during this pandemic?
The fact that we're all looking for answers. I'm not going to lie and say that, I have my strategic plan laid out and I know what to do. I know what's going to happen tomorrow. I know what's going to happen next week or even next month. All of us at the same point in time had our worlds completely disrupted. And the challenges that it poses is that people are looking to spiritual leaders for guidance, and we're not psychics. We don't have a magic wand, and we literally every morning, at least I know for me personally, every morning is okay, God, here's another day. I need your insight. And what I've noticed that during this time, people are looking for not just pastors of the church, they're looking for leadership they can trust, leadership that is going to communicate consistently with clarity and with direction and be balanced and not have an agenda to the right or to the left. But the challenge is simply this. Neither one of us went to school on pandemicology 101. We don't have a degree in any of this. There was no seminary class on how to lead a church in the midst of a pandemic, where you have something that is preventing you from one of the basis facts of church, which is gathering. So we're all in a unique time.
Definitely. You mentioned that people are not just looking to pastors, but to leaders. I know in general, outside of a pandemic or something going on, pastors can be particularly vulnerable in not taking care of their own wellness. We have witnessed, pastors take their own lives, pastors needing a sabbatical just because they haven't been they haven't had a balanced life, both home and family and church. As parishioners may look to see how what they can do to support their pastors, do you have any thoughts on how pastors can remain whole and what parishioners can do during this time to help them in that effort?
That's an outstanding question. And I'm going to go back to the beginning of this show. As pastors, we need to eat our own food. It hasn't been, but in the last 10 or so years, maybe within the last 5, that there's been this focus on emotional health and wellness and the integration of that within our spirituality. Maybe we can say 10 years or maybe 15. But for the most part, in our rearing and our upbringing, especially if you've been reared in what I call the faith movement, where you don't pay attention to your physical body. You don't pay attention to your emotions because your emotions are not the Spirit of God. And so we ignore these warning signs that our body is telling us. We ignore these warning signs that our emotions, our mind, our will is telling us. And we only say, you know what, I'm going to just keep driving because, the Word of God says, and the Word of God says, and the Word of God. And so we actually, as pastors, sometimes we're guilty of using God to run from God. Because in
Mm,
our spirituality, we have to have moments where we are exposed before the Creator. When I think about the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve went to create something to hide themselves from their vulnerability from God, God knew where they were. He knew how they looked. And in our mind, we think that if I can just cover up these areas I don't want him to know about, then he won't see them. But the reality is he's waiting for us as pastors to get humble enough to say, I'm not okay. That really did hurt. I'm really afraid. My Pastor Roderick Richardson, he's releasing a book called The Pain of Pastoring. And I've been, for the last 2 days or really last day since it came in the mail, I have read it cover to cover, and I'm on time number 1.5 through this book, because you don't necessarily think of what you experience leading groups of people, but you're not the only one. In fact, Moses, when he was leading the children of Israel, he led them out of slavery, and all they did to repay him was complain to him about how he was leading, but they were no longer in slavery. And so a pastor has the weight of the world on his shoulders. He has his congregation that he's leading. And depending on if you have a congregation of 15 or you have a congregation of 15,000, those are souls that are depending on you. I always say, I wish we were rappers, because a rapper can go from city to city with their same track list and rock out every show. But let a pastor do a message, the same message 2 weeks in a row. You're going to be like, is pastor praying? I think we need to go check on him. So there's the weight there. But then you've got to manage because preaching is only 10% of what we do. We've got another 90% of running an organization, running an operation, budget, salary, payroll, building, facilities, strategic planning. You have all these things going on, and I have yet to mention the pressures at home. And so now you're seeing where, we may need to cut some pastors some slack. Now, there are some who abuse, the office of pastor, but they're very few and far in between. Others are just trying to do the best they can with what they have and are trying to navigate in a world that no one has really seen or experienced before. So I hope I answered at least the first part of that question on, what's going on with pastors to remain whole and why they sometimes neglect their complete health.
So I wanted to kind of give people a little bit of foundation before we started talking about the spiritual side of wellness. So how would you describe the relationship between wellness and prayer?
I believe prayer is our ability to say on a daily basis, God, I am not equipped without you to handle this. And God, I'm not going to take this day for granted. I wish I could be on this call and say that, I've always had this illustrious prayer life where I spent hours a day basking at the feet of Jesus. That's not the case. I have allowed at times the minutia that comes with ministry and with life to come in and crowd out time where I should have spent at the feet of Jesus. And it's not until I run into a wall where I'm exhausted or, I have just a mental fog where I can't think clearly or I feel completely helpless and overwhelmed, where I'm reminded that when was the last time you just simply slowed down long enough to have what I call a loving union with God? Prayer slows us down long enough for God to examine the areas of our heart. And there are places of our heart that aren't necessarily seen visibly. And we need God to look into those places, which I call the blind spots of our life, to say, hey, I'm noticing these areas of pride in your life. Hey, I'm noticing this area of low self-esteem. Hey, I'm noticing this area of fear. Can we talk about it? I want to help you with that. And prayer lets you say, let me lay all of my agenda at the feet of God so that he can tell me what's important. And without prayer, there is no complete wellness.
Mm. All right, we got a question from one of our very loyal viewers, Edwin. Can you see that question on the screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, number one, it's kind of like fingerprints. We all have unique fingerprints. I don't want to say that mine differs because I don't know every ministry in Atlanta, and there are a ton of churches here. But what I can say is that our ministry assesses the needs of the community that we serve. And so you can't have too many people helping to move forward a neighborhood or neighborhoods or organizations or businesses or nonprofits, or for us, education, schools. You can't have enough help. But what you have to do as a church is say, how can we best serve? And so for us, our approach, and what I'd say would be different from the typical church approach, is I always said that if I had a choice between having one amazing Sunday gathering or having 7 days a week where we could find opportunities to either give back or to do life in the context of relationships, I would choose 7 days a week to give back and do life in the context of relationships. Well, we started a little over 2 years ago. Little did I know, 2 years later, the only way to do church is in the way that we set up. And so for us, our focus has been the servant leadership approach. We didn't start off with a whole ton of money. I wish we did. We did not. We didn't start, with the backing of another organization. We literally started with what was in our hands. Actually started outdoors, if I had to go even before that. And so I've been able to watch God take the seed of obedience and the heart of service and then multiply that many times over, so that more importantly, we could have influence. And more importantly, we could be in position to, when needs come up in our community, you can pick up the phone and call the outlet, and we will do our very best to serve and to assist. So I guess is my long answer to a short question.
Now, it sounds like the outlet already has an infrastructure on staying connected during this time. For those people who are missing in-person gatherings for their church or whatever type of place of worship that they may attend, what are some suggestions you might have for them to get plugged in and to stay connected, to fill that void?
Yeah, we first have to go back to, what is the purpose of church? And we're in right now the largest shift or disruption of church in the last 500 years. And there are certain models, there are certain things that we're used to that will not exist in the coming days. And we have to be aware that we need to find out what is going to work today. So a lot of what people miss is the gathering component. They miss social interactions. And one of the things that I could say from the most primitive of places is to make sure that your daily calendar still has spiritual disciplines scheduled in. And so each day for you personally, schedule a time where you can, open up the Word. The YouVersion Bible app is outstanding with different plans, with different reminders that you could set to just make sure that you have that spiritual nourishment. But let's just say you're a part of a church and they offer a midweek or a Sunday gathering. Arrange your schedule to still be able to be a part digitally, no matter where you serve. The other thing that I would say is, if let's just talk to the person who may not have a church home. Maybe you have people that you reach out to. Schedule a weekly check-in with those that you care about most, because you're going to find that when your mind is, okay, I'm going to have this life where I have these spiritual disciplines put in, but I'm at the same time making it a point to reach out to others beyond me, you're going to sense that level of fulfillment that you would get if you were physically in a building. Now, as a pastor of a local church, there are a lot of questions that I still have to answer. But in the midst of doing that, I go back to what our Great Commission is, which is for us to go into all the world. And unfortunately, what we realized at churches, we've been saying, come join us, come see us, come be at our church, and come inside the four walls. And the whole time in Christianity, Christ was saying, I need you all to get out into the world and be able to be a light in the midst of culture. So we could go on for days on ways to be the church, while for some of us who are still waiting to be able to gather back in person.
I think you may have started tiptoeing into what I was about to ask you next, and that is for those people who are struggling right now. And there are a lot of people struggling. We have seen in the news suicides are up. I read maybe about 3 weeks ago where one of the writers on the hit show This Is Us ended her own life. I have a friend who was just on this show 3 weeks ago. Her father took his life maybe a week after she was on the show. So there are a lot of people who are isolated. There are a lot of people who feel hopeless, and some of those people were not connected to any type of body of faith before this all happened. For those people who are now looking, that maybe they are hungry for something other than food, what advice would you give them?
The first thing I want to say is give yourself some grace. Give yourself some grace. I know there's this drive that I need to have this and I need to have that. I need to have this. We are in the middle of a pandemic, and you are putting one foot in front of the other. And before we do anything, you need to be encouraged that your strength is shining and showing through. That's the first thing we need to do. Give yourself some grace. The second thing is, especially again, if you're a person of faith looking to connect to a community of faith, some things that I would say look forward or look for as it relates to churches that will be relevant are churches that are committed to the mission and values that align to things that you care about. Churches that will survive in the coming days have a focus of how can I come alongside and help others versus how can I condition people to be more like me. And that will help you in your process to find a place to belong. The second thing I could say is while you're looking, because sometimes finding a church takes time. There have been people who just joined our church but have been attending for 2 years. And so there is no set time between when people join, and all those things are as the spirit leads and as a person feels comfortable. But if you're kind of still getting your feet wet and wanting to find out what places for me, ask questions, be open, look for nonprofits to serve at, and something I've noticed that happens in life is that as you go about helping someone else, your questions that you have end up being answered in the process. So if you're a person who's looking for a place where you can get spiritually fed, a place where you can get a part of a mission or a purpose that's bigger than yourself, those are things that you kind of want to ask as you're looking for different places. But in the meantime, I mean, church is on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week now. But even deeper with that, we have some resources and some things that are connected with our church for those who maybe beyond church, you need to talk to someone professionally. And I think that the church as a whole, we should do a better job of waving that, not white flag as if we don't have the complete answer, but we need to be a better resource as to connecting people with places where they can get help specifically for their need.
I'm glad you said that because as you were talking, I was kind of thinking, okay, we're talking about just someone who wants to get connected. What about those who are in dire need? And I don't mean financially, like they are dire need, where they don't necessarily feel like they really want to go on any further. How can number one, how can people who are of faith, who are believers, how can they be resources? What ways do you recommend people connect? I mean, you mentioned that the church needs to be better equipped to say, okay, we will pray with you. And while we're praying with you, here's a recommendation for counseling or a treatment center or whatever. What are some things that just lay people can do as we all continue to move through this pandemic?
I think we should slow down. And I know we all have a lot going on. And it seems like in the midst of shelter in place, it's like for some reason being at home made us busier. But slowing down to ask the questions, how are you? And not just moving on to the next question, or into the conversation just because it's a formality, but genuinely asking. I think we all need to pay attention to those who are nearest to us, who we are in close proxemics to. And if they begin to act differently or they begin to withdraw, um, I think the biggest thing we could all cultivate is being safe places ourselves where people can come to where, listen, no judgment. I'm not here to give you a sermon. Sometimes, and I use this in relationships, but it also helps in leadership. You have to ask yourself, do people want the leader or do they want the listener? And more times than not, people want the listener. They don't even with me when people call and they begin to tell me what they have going on. I've got this, I've got that. Although internally I have the quote unquote answer, sometimes they just want an outlet to talk. Sometimes they just want someone to just let them know that you are heard. Now, when you have these situations or the cases where someone doesn't sound like that they want to go on any longer, and you identify that and you hear that, it's important for you to contract for safety with them, meaning you need to ask them, You know, now I'm hearing this. I'm not trying to make a judgment, but I'm hearing just you say X, Y, and Z. Um, are you okay after I we get off this phone or after we leave each other's socially distanced presence? Can you commit to me that you will not hurt yourself and you don't have the means to hurt yourself? And being honest and kind of leaning into those moments. And I think we'd be amazed that sharing our story, not dumping on people, but just saying, hey, I understand that you're feeling that way, and I'm so sorry that you're feeling that way, but I can only imagine, but I'm here. And just letting people know that you're not the only one feeling the way that you're feeling, or that you're not alone in feeling the way that you're feeling.
What is one suggestion you have that people could do to improve their overall wellness?
Whew, go to bed.
All right, good night. Good night, Vince.
Yeah, no, no. We don't take into consideration how much of our screen time in a day that we consume, like our phones, our televisions, our tablets, you know, the different white noise that we see. Social media has a way of, and I'm talking people with no money and people I talk to with big money. You can get on social media and begin scrolling and comparing your life to someone else's who is just putting on social media what they want you to know. And if one thing I could say is stop the comparison. Stop the comparison, whether it's the comparison of the expectations that you had in your mind as to where you should be at this point of your life, or stop the comparisons when you look at someone else's life and then belittle what's going on in your life. There's a quote that says, the only way to belittle a miracle is to compare it to something else. Each
Mm,
of our lives are miracles in of themselves. And if we just talked about the stories and the adversity that we pulled ourselves through, we would be able to see the handiwork of God. But we only begin to diminish the value of what God has done in our life when we look over the fence to someone else and say, man, I wish I had this. I wish I had that going for me. I wish, and that doesn't help. So the first thing, the one thing, let's make it a point that we will not compare and then value our life based off the comparison that we've made.
okay. All right, we have another question for you on the screen from Edwin. Thanks so much for being active and involved, Edwin.
Whew, every week. So here's the deal with the pandemic. So I was gung ho on we're still gonna meet, we're still going to back in March. This is back in March, and I said, well, I'm not as well versed in medicine as I should be. I didn't go to school for that, so let me pull the healthcare professionals and the community leaders in for a roundtable to advise me. And on the Thursday before a Sunday service, they said, we're going to tell you this right now, Vince, you need to just hold off on in-person services. So we were one of the first churches that I know to say, hey, we're gonna just go completely online. As a planner, I've had sermons listed months in advance, almost through the rest of the year. But in the pandemic, we have had, there was a season from March 15th all the way to June of this year, so just last month, where every message was from scratch. Every message was, what is God saying right now? And I go back and I look at those messages and I'm amazed. The biggest one, I would say, is the very first one, which was called, for me, Rock the Boat. Of course, yeah,
Aaliyah?
I used Aaliyah in my sermon, so y'all, listen. I'm gonna get born again this year. I promise. I promise I will. But it dealt with Noah, who was able to hear from God before everyone else did, and when he began to act on what he heard, everyone called him crazy until it rained. See, rain had never existed on Earth And so God was telling Noah, I want you to build this monstrosity for rain. The issue is this monstrosity he was building was for something that no one had ever seen. And so there are times where God is asking you to be proactive in your life and to do things ahead of culture and ahead of when everyone else is, but it's so that he can position you to be where he needs you to be to save others. For our church, I would probably say, and they can, if they're watching, they can correct me if there's another message that stood out to them. But it was a series that I had, which was called "How Are You?" Just simply, "How are you?" Where we slowed down and we asked questions where, how am I really doing? And can I be honest? Um, I reached a point in this whole pandemic where I was struggling with terrible anxiety, but was too spiritual to admit what was really happening. And it wasn't until I began to ask that question, how are you, to myself, that I realized that, Vince, as a pastor, you're dealing with anxiety. We've got families on payroll. We've got families who are, we're responsible to lead during this time. We've got members who have been dealing with COVID. We're having members who are losing their jobs. In my head, I'm like, Lord, is this the end of church altogether as we know it? So I was dealing with this level of anxiety, and I had to slow down and say, how are you? And I had to realize that there was an irrational thought that was creating real emotion. And until I met the irrational thought with what was logic, I was then able to pinpoint where were these emotions that were keeping me up, that were keeping me out of rhythm, out of routine coming from. And so, between rock the boat, uh, getting out the boat, getting outside of your comfort zone, and how are you dealing with what's going on within and applying biblical principles, those were the two most important messages.
What do you think is going to be the long-term legacy and impact, particularly on spiritual wellness, as a result of this pandemic? Whenever we get on the other side, whenever that's going to be.
Yeah, here's the thing. I don't think we're going to be on the other side. I think we have to embrace that this is the new side. This is the new normal. This is the new life. I I I had a check-in meeting with my church last Saturday to say, okay, I expected to say, all right, so in August we're gonna, and just last week the numbers just did like this, and it's like, y'all. And then I saw them Bankhead pictures, and I'm like, y'all, just stay home. Um, so I think the biggest thing, and I'm gonna be real honest with you, the biggest thing that is going to come from this is that as preachers, we can't have people dependent on us. We have to
Mhm.
empower households. Every leader of every house is a pastor, is a priest, is an extension of our campus. And so we have to go from come hear what I've got to say from the mouth of God to say, okay, now this is how I heard from God and this is how you hear from God. All right, let's have a little call and response. Let's work with this. Let's go in scripture verse by verse so you can have a handle on it and lead your family. I'm going to say something that is not necessarily popular, but I just somehow just sense like this could be the next thing. So we never thought in a million years that we would be restricted from gathering in person for church. In fact, I think sometimes I may have took church for granted. Like I'm always going to have Sunday to be able to make it, make it up and make it better than it was before. The one thing that we're not taken into consideration is that, okay, they limit the in-person gatherings, but we can't get dependent on the online gatherings. And so instead of adapting, I actually want to encourage churches to innovate, meaning don't just change your methodology from I used to have people depend on meeting us in person to now I want to have people depend on meeting me online. No, you've got to change all of that, because what happens when internet access is disrupted? See, we didn't think that a pandemic would disrupt physical gatherings. We're only paying for internet access. When we pay for internet, we don't own the internet. And so we have to be prepared in the event that we're unable to do what you and I are doing right now and what churches all over the world are doing every Sunday, to say, listen, if something takes place and we can no longer gather by the internet, I have at least equipped every family to lead a Bible study in their home weekly. So the legacy that comes from this is a return to spirituality in the house, and it's not relegated to the pastor. And from the pastor side to the people, we're not making people dependent on seeing the anointed cherub that we expect them to come see when they come to church. I will say this one thing: COVID has revealed ego in the pulpit.
Mm,
COVID has revealed ego in the pulpit because our metrics were about how many people were coming, but we failed to ask how many lives were we transforming by them coming. And that's a different metric than just a full building. And so COVID has been the great revealer and revealing all of our motives. And, they're all out here now. And I think the legacy is going to be, we've got to own this in our own homes.
definitely. We got one more question related to what you thought you were going to be doing in college.
Baseball is coming back. What is your opinion of all the changes due to COVID? So um, I would like to drill a little bit deeper. So I saw baseball is coming back, and what's my opinion with all the changes? I think right now, because no one knows anything, we're all trying everything. And so I think we're in a we're going to see kind of moment where professional sports are coming back, but they will be honest and say, we will see. College football, we will see. I mean, that's gonna hurt if there's no college football. NFL is like, listen, we don't care. We're gonna be out here. But I think with all of it, the better part of what we need to be focused on is making sure that those who do not have access to quality health care are not being forgotten about in all of this, because professional athletes, at the end of the day, are making minimum six figures, but billion-dollar corporations are making sure that their athletes or their money makers has the best access to healthcare possible. But I believe that it's sending the wrong signal to the average everyday Joe that, listen, if you don't have the millions or the billions like these people do, you may be waiting in line. And what reminds me about the danger of this time is when I was talking with a member who overcame COVID. And they said, had they not had a member of their family who was a medical professional, they may have died, not because of the disease, but because of the lack of care. They were told to ascertain when it's either difficulty breathing and when they can't breathe. And so that's a thin line between the two. And without them having a cousin who was a healthcare worker who said, you need to get up and go to the hospital, they wouldn't have been able to get on a ventilator in time to keep their airways open. So those are the things we need to keep in mind. Like, yeah, the whole world is doing what they're doing, but we need to make sure that we're, keeping people that we have influence over in the best situation possible and not expose them to unnecessary risk.
All right. As we wrap up this fourth night on wellness, any final thoughts? That was actually a great way to close out that on athletes and sports and what may or may not be coming down the pipeline. But do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I want us to rid our lives of hurry. Hurry is the opposite of love. And in our fast-paced society, in our, when our calendars can build up, I want us to find a healthy pace to life. And it's going to require not only a healthy amount of self-care, but a healthy amount of self-love and loving ourselves enough to not work ourselves to the core, to the bone, but to live in a place where we build in margin in our lives. When we build in margin with our time, we'll then see margin in other areas of our life. not limited to, but also including our finances. So that's what I'm going to say. That's what's been helping me in this time is eliminate the need to hurry, build some margin into your schedules, and make sure you just love everybody because life is precious.
That it is. Well, thank you so much, Pastor Vince Thomas, for taking the time out to speak with my audience on wellness and bringing that spiritual perspective. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Until First Lady, I said hello.
I sure will. Thank you so
All
much
right.
for having me.
You're welcome. Have a good night.
All right, you too.
All right. Well, that's it for this Thursday edition of the Angela Ray Show. As always, I would like to remind you of Ray of Motivation number 54. Cleaning a mirror does not change the person who is reflected in it. Until next time, I encourage you to go